Okay, without further ado, please give a warm welcome for Godfrey Bloom.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and it's always a great pleasure to be back in this part of the world. You might notice the ties, the Worcester and Sherwood Foresters, where I spent some time, not wildly distinguished, I have to say, my army career, but great fun nevertheless. And I spent many a miserable cold night up on the training area just outside Mansfield and Alderton. So it's great to be back, and I'm sure some of you with service experience have been in that part of the world. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is we are drifting in to another extremely dangerous scenario regarding our military alliances, which are being done in a fairly secretive way. It's not going through Parliament, things aren't being debated in Parliament, they're being done behind closed doors on the nod, and I thought the best way of explaining this, maybe, or drawing this properly to your attention, is to talk about the historic analogy that we had. This has happened all before, and we're in, of course, 2018. It's the 100-year anniversary of the end of the Great War. And I want to talk, if you will bear with me, because I think we can learn a lot from history. We can learn a lot from history, and we're going down the same route again, rather than talk about exactly what's going on as it's happening today, subsection 6, paragraph 8 of what any alliance or arrangement we might be having, to explain how we got to the most ghastly, dreadful war, the Great War, which cost 1 million British Empire war dead and another 1 million British Empire young men made.
Yeah.
One of the most disgraceful wars in history, and one of the most unnecessary.
7 quid.
One of the most unnecessary. How could we have possibly borne 1 million casualties from the British Empire for a war which started between Austria and Serbia? How could we possibly have allowed ourselves to be sucked in to that nonsense? So I want to talk a little bit about how that came about, because our politicians never read history books, they never take any interest in history, so they go on and on and on making the same mistakes. And I even hear so-called prestigious, as it were, celebrity historians saying that the Great War could have been avoided. Sir Max Hastings is one of them. He said, well, if we hadn't gone to war, the outcome in the 1920s, if we hadn't defeated the Kaiser, would have been worse than it actually was. It makes you wonder what planet Sir Max Hastings lives on. We've got the Soviet Union, we've got Mussolini, we've got Hitler, all down to the Great War, the lunacy of the Great War. And how on earth could post-Great War Europe be worse? How could it possibly have been worse? And how do we get involved in it? Well, let's just have a look a little bit at the European situation over the last 1,000 years. And it's about 1,000 years ago when you might argue that we could recognise modern Europe in its current form. Just beginning there. Historians amongst you might argue that it was 800 years ago. You might argue one way or the other, but broadly let's call it 1,000 years ago, and so we can look at bringing it on from sort of the Norman invasion, roughly of England as it then was. Let's go back to there. Now we know that in the last 1,000 years there have been over 900 major conflicts in Europe. In one way or another, over 900. So there's been a major conflict in Europe almost every year for the last 1,000 years. Now, is that a reflection perhaps on continental Europe and their inability to get on with each other, or is it perhaps more a reflection on humankind? It may be that war is a natural state for mankind. Maybe it certainly would appear so, wouldn't it? If you go back to the beginning of time, war seems to be a natural state, sadly. And this has been going on, as I say, for 1,000 years in mainland Europe. Now, what is quite extraordinary, in my view, is how the British, or the English, of course, for most of that period, have got themselves involved in these continental quarrels and these military adventurism on mainland Europe. Now, we all know, virtually undisputed, that God is an Englishman. So God gave us an island. He gave us a great big moat. So he's basically, we don't have to get involved with anybody else. All we need is a navy to protect our islands, and that's it. We don't need to involve ourselves with foreign squabbles, but we can't seem to keep our nose out, can we? We can't seem to keep our nose out. And it goes right back, you can take it right back as far as you like, you can take it back to the Black Prince, you can take it back to Henry V. Okay, some very glorious battles. Poitiers, Crécy, Agincourt, it's some very glorious military experiences we've had, but to no end. To no end. It's just a question of using up blood and treasure. And it goes through every century. We had the war of the War of the Spanish Succession, the Napoleonic Wars, nothing of which came out of that. The Napoleonic Wars, to bring us closer up to date, the Napoleonic Wars and the Whigs at the time, the Whig party said, you know, why are we doing this? It was a good question. Okay, there were some glorious battles. We had some glorious victories from Admiral Nelson, some glorious victories by the Duke of Wellington in the Peninsula, culminating in Waterloo. Some very glorious military experiences and some very brave deeds of daring do. And all that is fine. Especially as we were biffing the French, who deserve a damn good biffing, in my opinion. And the reason they don't bloody or like us today, and they haven't liked us for 1,000 years, and it's no damn different today than it has been for the last 1,000 years. And that is the problem. We need to get away from this feeling that we're all chums together in Europe. They hate each other's guts. They all hate us. So we don't want to get ourselves involved with these wretched people. So how did we get there? Let's just go back to my analogy here with the Great War, if I may. Now, because this was all done by deceit. Now, of course, the British Empire was the greatest empire that the world's ever seen. It wasn't the most long-lived. In fact, in point of fact, it was quite short-lived by historical empire standards. It really only sort of lasted 150 years in its in the form that we know it. But it was a great trading empire. It was a great trading empire. It wasn't really like the Roman Empire, which was perhaps more of a military empire, and basically the British Empire was more of a trading empire than anything else. And what we need to just bear in mind is that, of course, we had a small army, a very small army. The British Empire always had relatively small armies, but a big navy, because we are an island race. And that's what we need. We need a decent navy, big navy, and that's fine. We've never needed the big armies like the Continentals have had. Now, the British Empire, which is something that BBC celebrity historians find difficult to swallow, was actually, broadly speaking, historically a force for good. And if anybody wants to dispute it, the best place to go to is Professor Neil Ferguson's book, Empire, who makes the case, I think, quite strongly that the British Empire, a bit like the curate saying, was good in parts. No empire is all good, no empire is all bad. It's a mix. So that's one thing that one always has to bear in mind. But of course, when you have a big empire, as ours was, it's going to breed jealousy. So you have jealousy from the rest of Europe in particular, and of course we squabble in Africa, imperial expansionism in Africa, from Belgium and France, to a lesser extent Germany, so on and so forth. So we had these contretemps with other European powers who wanted their slice of the cake, as it were, and that made us unpopular with almost just everybody. If you're the biggest, as we were then, the biggest, richest guy on the block, people are going to be jealous of you. That's human nature. Now, we did make mistakes in the empire, and the biggest mistake we made of them all was the South African War. The South African War was a mistake. The Boer War was a big mistake. for a number of reasons. It cost a lot of blood, a lot of treasure. It was totally unnecessary, as indeed most wars are. Most wars are unnecessary. And I did my thesis at the Royal College of Defence Studies on that very subject, that wars are expensive and very often don't result in any benefit to either to the belligerents. Very unlikely you can get a clear example of a black and white war being worth fighting. And in my dissertation, one of the ones I chose for being a right war, a just war, if you will, was of course the Falklands, which was British territory, which was invaded by a foreign power who had no right to be there. They call it the Malvinas. It's never belonged to Argentina. It's never belonged to them at all. So consequently, that invasion was simply wrong, full stop, and they need to be booted off, and we booted them off, and quite right too. But you don't get many examples. You don't get many examples of wars like that, which is so crisp and clean. So the Boer War was a waste of time and money. It made us even more doubly unpopular with the rest of the world. And at that particular time, it was then felt at the end of Lord Salisbury's administration, which was regarded as one of the most successful administrations in our country. It brought up the Industrial Revolution, the term of the Enlightenment, and just towards the end of the 1900s. That was an extremely successful administration, but it culminated in the stupidity of the Boer War. And of course, the growing industrial powers of the United States, the growing industrial power, of course, of Germany, they were growing, and it was generally thought by the then administration that followed, Alpha Balfour's administration, Conservative administration, that we needed allies. And that was, generally speaking, endorsed by the following Liberal administration of David Campbell Bannerman, that we needed allies, continental allies. Big mistake. You don't. You don't need continental allies. And we certainly didn't need them when we had the greatest empire the world's ever seen. We certainly didn't need any allies. Because all that happens when they continue their squabbles on the continent, you get sucked in. You get sucked in. So you don't want to have anything to do with continental Europe when it comes to treaties. I'm going to come back to that important word, treaties. Anyway, it was deemed necessary that we would have these alliances. And of course we were unpopular with the French. There was an incident in Africa, imperial expansionism, the Fashoda incident, which actually triggered yet more animosity between the British and the French. And of course the Martello towers that were built in the 1900s, as you probably know, were built because we perceived right up until 1900 that the potential enemy was France, because France had been the enemy for 1,000 years. And they are the enemy today. Make no mistake about it. And we're beginning to see that develop already. It doesn't mean to say you don't have French friends, you might like French literature, you like French wine, you like French holidays. It's not a question of being personally anti-French. It's a question of political institutionalized combativeness between the two countries. There's nothing you can do about that. It's in our gene. So we have this kind of problem that we wanted an ally in Europe, or so it was felt at the time. Now, of course, the natural ally might have been Germany, because the royal family was so heavily connected at the time. Queen Victoria's family, very connected, House of Saxe-Coburg, very close to the Germans. But of course, unfortunately, the Germans do seem to turn up as dodgy leaders, don't they? Decade after generation, there seems to be another loony at the helm of the Germans. And of course, it was no exception then. They had the Kaiser, who was a nutcase, and less than helpful, and he wouldn't contemplate any form of alliance with Britain. In fact, there was a jealousy between the Germans and the British, and of course we had the great naval race, and he wanted to build up a great big navy. Germans don't need a navy, they're not a maritime power, they weren't a maritime power, then they're not a maritime power. Now, there was no need for a navy. Well, that made us suspicious. And so we continued the naval race, because we wanted the biggest navy. And we had the biggest navy by quite a long way. It was the most powerful, more powerful than the next two navies put together. So we had a very powerful navy. But of course the Continentals had massive armies. So the French had 1 million men under arms, the Germans had 1 million men under arms, the Russians had 2 million under arms, and of course they had their reserves. So they were dealing then, at that time, as indeed they had been dealing for nearly 150 years, with huge land armies lined up against each other, completely lined up against each other. And of course our army was extremely small. Our army really was, by those standards of the day, was very small. It was more of a sort of a police force, if you will, for keeping the empire together. To give anybody who was naughty, who didn't see the wonderful benefits of the British Empire, a smack round their head. And so that's really what our army was for. And the navy was to protect our sea routes and our sea trade, our maritime power. And that's how we were, and that's how things stood. Well, we decided to do this. The French had an alliance with the Russians. The French had an alliance with the Russians, which gave the Germans the feeling that perhaps they were being surrounded, and the Axis forces in the middle were Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire as it then was. We decided that we would try and make some sort of arrangement with the French, some sort of treaty with the French. Again, as I say, a huge mistake, because we kept out of the Franco-Prussian War. In 1870, there was the Franco-Prussian War, and we stayed out of it. It was nothing to do with us, whether Alsace, the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine were part of Germany or part of France, and it isn't today. Squabbles between Johnny Frenchmen and the Germans are nothing to do with us on this island, and we should never involve ourselves with them. Now, after the blood and slaughter of the Battle of Waterloo, the very expensive in blood and treasure, very expensive wars, Napoleonic wars, which in my view are largely unnecessary, but anyway, we fought them. And we went into a period of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and things got a lot better for everybody throughout that period. 100 years, we kept out of all the European continental squabbles, a bit of a punch-up in the Crimea, but leaving that one aside. So we kept out of everything, we just got richer and better medicine, better science, and society made leaps forward that were unprecedented, basically since the time of the Roman Empire. So it was a very successful period, keeping our nose out. Now, who actually, therefore, formulated this new relationship with France? The number one guy that did this was actually the Prince of Wales, King Edward VII. He was a Francophile, he spoke fluent French. He actually won the French public over after the Fashoda incident and other problems that we had, international incidents with French. He won them over with his visits to Paris, because he was a very, as we all know, with Edward, Prince of Wales and Edward VII, as he then became, he was a bon viveur, he spoke fluent French, he liked crumpet, he did all the same things that the French like. So they took to him immediately because he was a very jovial sort of character. And he moved that forward, that relationship forward. Now there's another very shady character that spent some time with the Prince of Wales and Edward VII when he was out there, and that's a man called Sir Henry Wilson. I don't know whether any of you have heard of a man called Sir Henry Wilson. No? He's a very shady and dark character in British history. He was a general, a Francophile, brought up in French, spoke French. Never trust a soldier who speaks French. It ain't natural. So he was giving promises and implications of promises to the French without the authority of anybody at all, certainly not Parliament and certainly not the British government. And the administration of Balfour, the administration, subsequent administrations, liberal administrations of Campbell Bannerman of Asquith, found that they had been pulled into what was called the Entente Cordiale. Now, the Entente Cordiale is neither fish nor foul nor good red herring. It's not a treaty, it's sort of a behind-the-scenes nod and a wink, if you will. That's what an entente is. It's a nod and a wink. So it doesn't deter anybody, but it does suck you in from the position of moral obligation, if you will, moral obligation. So this had nothing whatsoever to do with Parliament, this commitment, if you will. Bear in mind, as I say again, there was no legal commitment, no treaty obligation. But by the time 1914 came round, and we'd seen Austria line up for war against Serbia, and then the Germans came in, of course, on the Austrian side. The French then and the Russians mobilized to protect the Serbs and the Slavs, and so it got out of control. I would argue that the Great War was actually a huge accident. Nobody really wanted it, except perhaps some of the German General Staff, whose view was, that if you are a soldier in a Prussian environment, and Germany at that time was basically run by the Prussians, you want a war. And we've seen that phenomenon now with the United States of America. They spend $1 trillion a year, nearly, on armaments and military personnel. They have 200,000 overseas military staff across the globe, and over 1,000 military bases. Well, if your whole economy and your whole political dynamic is military in that way, you're going to want a war, because that's the whole point of it, isn't it? What's the point of having 11 aircraft carrying groups, thousands and thousands of men, if you're not going to have a punch-up? You need a punch-up in order to justify the tax dollar, and that's what we're seeing today. And of course, going back to the German period, in the early Edwardian period, that was it. They had 1 million men armed, more than 1 million men. They brought a big navy trying to catch up. So they had all this armament, all this military. And so the General Staff, the senior General Staff, wanted to use that. They wanted to use that. And it's a natural thing. If you're going to get it and pay for it, you want to use it. So arguably, the Austrian High Command and the German High Command weren't anti-war, but I think everybody else involved in the whole situation was anti-war. Nobody really wanted a war, and certainly not a Liberal government of 1914. So, but we got sucked in because we'd made all these commitments. And so an entente cordiale doesn't actually protect you as it should do. A treaty is a protective thing. So the Germans didn't know whether we were going to come into the war or not, and right up to the last minute. So the whole arrangement didn't deter an attack on France by the Germans. And so the whole thing blew up, and we could have easily stayed out. Some people make the mistake of thinking that we went in to protect the neutrality of Brussels, of Belgium. No, that isn't the case. There was no treaty obligation. There was a treaty obligation to respect the neutrality, but it was a tripartite treaty. And as soon as Germany invaded Belgium, it abrogated the treaty. So there was no treaty arrangement. In fact, nobody really made the treaty argument in the House of Parliament before we went to war. It was an emotional thing, poor little Belgium, the big guys bullying the small guys, and the Brits like to stick up for we all love to stick up for the underdog. And so that's how we got sucked into this. So it was clandestine, it was behind closed doors, it was nothing to do with Parliament, it was machinated by a guy called Sir Henry Wilson, who built the whole thing. Now this is all happening again. This is all happening again. We are signing up, not treaties, but behind the scenes alliances with various countries at the moment. We've signed them with Germany, we've signed them with Holland, we're about to sign up to more deals with France, another entente cordiale, if you will. But none of this is being debated in Parliament. This isn't going through Parliament. People aren't standing up and saying, what are the implications of this? Could we be sucked in if the French and the Germans fall out again? Or the Germans fall out with the Russians? or whatever may happen, you know, are we going to be sucked into this confrontation again as we were in 1914? And of course, bear in mind that 1914, we talk of World War I, we talk of World War II, which is actually not true. It was one war. As my grandfather used to say, he was injured on the Sea Ridge in 1917. There was one war, boy. There was one war. It came in too fast. It came in too fast. There would never have been a Second World War if there hadn't been a First World War. It's just what followed on. And so that's the situation that we're being dragged into at the moment. Things that aren't being discussed, they're not being discussed in Parliament, and we have another major problem. And that is, of course, we don't have any serious defence correspondence in mainstream media. Now, some of you older chaps I know will remember John Keegan and Claire Hollingworth, the Daily Telegraph, and one or two of the leading newspapers, for some time actually, and of course the Times back to the Crimea, when the press did yeoman work in uncovering some of the problems that we had with the Crimea, logistics, all these other things. So the press has a huge role to play. Now the press now has been gilded. There are no serious defence correspondents. The Sunday Times has Lucy Fisher. Well, she's good on handbags, I'm quite sure. But she doesn't know anything about defence. We've got a muppet at the BBC who doesn't know anything about this job. So nobody is questioning what's going on. It's not coming before Parliament. And of Parliament, of course, the people with any serious military expertise are extremely few.
No, it's mine.
I would argue probably only 3 or 4 people, even any other remote of geopolitical strategy and military strategy. One of them is Dr. Julian Lewis. I did my course at Royal College with him. He's very good. So they are very few. Gavin Williamson, of course, Minister of Defence, is utterly useless. In fact, the average time spent as a Minister of Defence is pathetically small. I think the average is something like 14 or 15 months. Nobody holds that position for more than 14 or 15 months. So they never get an opportunity to get on top of their brief. So all these things that are happening behind the scenes, all these problems that we are facing in the future are not even being discussed. They're not being discussed in Parliament, and they're not being discussed in mainstream media. And I can't help thinking that some of this is deliberate. Why would a newspaper like the Times, I know the Times, we all know the Times isn't what it was, why would they have somebody with absolutely no knowledge of defence matters at all as their leading defence correspondent? Was she ditched at the Christmas party? I don't know. Who knows? Who knows how these people get the job? I mean, who gave Gavin Williamson the MOD brief? It wasn't even the school call. And so these guys are utterly hopeless. But as always when these things happen, it's not them that goes to war. When we get sucked into these things, it's not them that go. It's our young men. You get sucked into Iraq, you get sucked into Afghanistan, you get sucked into all these places. It's our young men that get killed and maimed. Politicians don't. They sit behind closed doors, they're protected, they've got bodyguards, they've got armour-plated cars they drive around in. When it gets really nasty, there's a big bunker for them to hide in. And I've often made I've often taken the view that I would take away all protection from politicians. They'd have to take their chances like we all do here. They've got to get on the tube, get on the train, go about their business like we all have to with no protection. And then they might think twice about all the policies. Their immigration policies, their defence policies, all these other things. They might think, just a minute, this might actually bite me in the arse. At the moment, they don't care too much because it doesn't bite them in the arse, it just bites us in the arse. So something needs to be done. So it's still small print stuff. It's still small print. Nobody's talking about it. And if we're not careful, we're going to be sucked in again. Maybe in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years' time, I don't know. But bear in mind, it's continental Europe has had a war basically every year for the last 1,000 years. There's always another one round the corner. There's always another round the corner. And we're committed to defend the French or the Germans or the Dutch against somebody else. That is going to just suck us in yet again. I'll leave you with one thought. Why do they need an army? Where does it clash with NATO? Well, NATO was a defensive treaty organisation against what was a threat of the Soviet Union. I would argue a real threat, not perhaps as big a threat as we might have thought it was at the time, but a threat, and we understood it. And the Americans made a deal with the Russians that we wouldn't push the NATO borders forward. We wouldn't do that. Now, we've done that. We've broken our word on that. We now have troops in... We have British troops now in the Ukraine, we have British troops in Estonia, Poland, right up, we pushed it right up to the Russian border. And we said that we wouldn't do that. And when I did at Sandhurst the Soviet Studies course, we were trained, I'm going back a few years here, we were trained to look at it from the Soviet perspective, look at it from the Russian perspective. What do they think? You know, what are they thinking? As we move forward and forward and forward, bases, military personnel, all moving further and further to the Russian border. You've got to see it from their point of view. Why would we do this? So we're just making Europe a more dangerous place. And we get constant propaganda how Russians are bad guys, or they're all really nasty guys, all the rest of it. They're not very nice guys. But they're not the danger to the planet at the moment. They're not the ones with 200,000 overseas personnel. They're not the ones with 1,000 overseas bases. They're not the ones destabilising Syria, invading Iraq and Afghanistan now. So you've got to think about the other guy's point of view. So will there be some sort of clash between Russia and an EU state? Maybe, maybe not. But is it anything to do with us? It certainly shouldn't be. Has NATO ever expanded? The answer clearly yes, it has, and that needs rethinking. It used to be defensive. We have a ministry, ladies and gentlemen, a ministry of defence. We don't have a ministry of attack. Why do we need 2 aircraft carrying groups? Why do the Americans need 11 aircraft carrying groups? Russian military spending at the moment is only about 8% of what the United States spends. But where is the threat? The militarism, the military adventurism that we're seeing globally at the moment, it's not coming from the old enemies. And I would argue, when you see Catalonia, and we all saw those pictures on the screen in Spain, and Catalonia voting for independence, what is this army for, one wonders? What is this army for? Is it to protect us against the big bad Russians? Or is it to try and invade places who want independence from the European Union? Not that Catalonia does, they want to be independent and part of the European Union, which is like the Scots. I don't get it. You either want independence or you don't want independence. I don't see that swapping London for... Anyway, no, we all know that. It's just weird. I think it's the porridge. But anyway, this is the problem. What is this army for? What is this army for? We already have NATO, which is a defence arrangement. Why do we need an army? Is it to punish? And of course, Venetia is the same. There are other parts of Europe who don't want some of what the European Union is doing. And we've seen Slovenia, Slovakia, Poland and Hungary refuse to take immigrants. Refuse to take them. No, we're not doing this, and we're not doing this. So what's the army for? To make them take these places? Is it to make them toe the line, this army? And you look at the commissioners, and you look at Juncker, and you look at all the other guys when you see them, and that nutcase guy, Bush, I can't remember his name, yeah, him, Tosspot. You know, these guys are seriously dangerous people. These guys are dangerous. Give them an army. Lord only knows what they'll do with it, but certainly don't give them an army with British young men, not with our young men. So we need to be vigilant. We need to take this very seriously. We need to lobby our MPs. We need to write to newspapers, because this can only come from us. This isn't going to come from anywhere else. As we've seen, there's a political elite, and boy, haven't we learned that in the last 2.5 years. I knew this because when I was working with them behind the scenes at Chatham House in the Royal College, I knew who was running the country. We all laugh at Yes Minister, and my goodness me, that was very good, but it's got a lot more sinister now. The civil servants are now overtly political, they go publicly political, and they hold the levers of power. We thought with 17.4 million votes on Brexit that Brexit would happen. I always knew it would be betrayed in some way, but not to the extent that it's being betrayed now. Nobody here voted for Ollie Robbins, slimy little guy, who was chairman of the Oxford European Society when he was in Oxford. He's a committed federalist, and they all are. You couldn't get promoted in the last 40 years above one-star rank of the civil servant unless you were a federalist. So no longer are the reins of power in our hands of the electorate. They've long since gone. They're not even in the hands of most politicians now. And I spoke to David Davis the other day. He lives up the road to me, and when he resigned, I just cycled around up the road with him last Saturday by. And he said they ambushed me at Chequers. He said I haven't seen any of this. Now Dominic Raab's just done the same thing. He's just done the same thing. It all comes from the civil service, and this is the problem. And the army will come the same way. And when I heard about this first in 2011. When I was a guest lecturer at the Joint Service Staff College at Shrivenham, and there was an airman, there was a senior airman, Royal Air Force guy, who was advocating a European Union army, advocating it on the basis it would make a lot more promotion for everybody. Well, it would, I suppose, you've got to see it from his point of view. Everybody gets promoted. It's not quite the way I think we should grow our armed forces. But so this has been around since 2011. It was denied in the referendum by the Deputy Prime Minister, whose name escapes me. Clay, who said this wasn't going to happen. This is going to happen. And they're already saying it's not going to happen. This is just going to be sort of a little bit of arrangement, security, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the procurement, it'd be interesting. It means that we can't even manufacture our own defence equipment. It'll have to go to tender, it will have to be spread, it will have to be spread, our procurement policy will have to be spread throughout the European Union. And anybody here as ex-serviceman who remembers the Armstrong motorcycle from the SDK, because the Canadians in NATO, it was a NATO thing, not an EU thing, they didn't make anything for Canadians, they insisted on making something for NATO. The only thing that hadn't been Bagsy, because at the time it was all motorcycles were Japanese. They said, well, we'll make motorcycles. I said, well, the Colonel doesn't make motorcycles. So we'll make one. We'll invent one. So we ended up with a crappy bike that didn't work, which cost somewhere in the region of £1,500 in the days when you could buy a Honda 250 or something, spray and breathe for 200 quid. Bloody useless motorbike, and that's what happens. And I was just getting a briefing in Arizona the other day from the Air Force, United States Air Force, that all the money we spent on the Typhoon, all that money, and it is so far behind the F-35 technology. They said, my briefing people said that they can shoot down an F-35, F-35 can shoot down a tornado before the tornado even knows it's in combat. Yeah. So it's a question of technology, and we will end up, if we're not careful with our, it does need to invest technology. So the whole thing's a dog's breakfast, but this is a political game. This is a political game, and it could cost our young men their lives, like it did in 1914. Just think of 1914, 1913, and just leave you with one thought. Tell us so, the French president, when he made his victory speech in 1919 to the French Parliament, he did not mention the British Empire.
I'm using my own.
Not once in his entire speech. No thank you to British Empire. Told you about 8 like that. I'll take any questions at this time.
Thanks, Godfrey. Any questions for Godfrey? James?
Well, in terms of NATO, what do you think our future is in that kind of organisation?
In terms of NATO?
Well, what's our future?
Yeah, what's our future?
Well, I don't know. This is starting now to split a little bit down the middle. NATO, some NATO senior commanders have just come out and said the European Union Army is a bad idea. But there are, I know for a fact, because I was there, senior officers who favour EU, an EU army. What was interesting, anecdotally, when I was at Shrivenham, which is an audience, for those who don't know, of middle-ranking officers around here, the colonel, commander, that kind of, the middle management, if you will, at that level. I was the next speaker on from the guy who wanted the EU army, and I was explaining the Queen's Commission, and a lot of you will know that. The Queen's Commission, which I'm proud to hold, as my father and my grandfather did before me. My responsibility is to Her Majesty. That's my commission. I'm her trusty and well-beloved friend. I know I am, because she signed the certificate to say so, and it's on my bed on the wall. I'm her trusty and well-beloved friend. That is the Queen's Commission. Nothing to do with foreign politicians in Brussels. And when I explained, because it's mixed, obviously the audience was mixed, it wasn't just British officers, it was officers from across the world. I explained the concept of the commission, and what was fascinating was the officers, the army officers from the better regiments, the more prestigious regiments, call them what you will, the household and the guards were horrified that system, that Queen's Commission might be interfered with by some commitment or oath to Brussels in any way. The Air Force, with probably less binding to tradition, really thought that they could get to be a group captain that was a bit quicker, so that was okay. But generally speaking, NATO is an anachronism. NATO is an anachronism. It was a child of the 1950s against the Soviet Union. It's badly out of date, and it's now dangerous. It's now dangerous. NATO's dangerous now. It protected us for years and years, and now it seems to be there as a stick with which to poke the Russian bear. And if you go back to your history again, if you go back to Napoleon, and you go back to Hitler, the Russian bear is not somebody to poke when you don't need to. It's not our enemy. They're not a strategic enemy at all. So I'd get rid of NATO, and I tell you what I'd like to see in its place. I would like to see a defence organisation, a loose defence organisation by perhaps the English-speaking peoples. So maybe North America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, in the event of invasion. No soldiers sent overseas, no military adventurism. If one of us is actually invading, then we band together. We don't crash around the world in places where we've no business.
Any more questions?
Yeah, maybe.
Angela.
Davis, the Dragons actually sent him a 600-page judicial review that can void the European Communities Act 1972, and he completely ignored it. So he's a traitor. So they're all the politicians are traitors. They just ignore it. Like, when we present them with evidence that we're not lawfully a member of the EU, we never have been. They just ignore it.
I've read much on this, and you're quite right. But even so, let's say that it was. We could have overturned that in an afternoon. You don't need 2.5 years of negotiation. We could have overturned that in an afternoon. Parliament mandated the electorate to make the decision on membership of the European Union. We said we want to leave. David Cameron said that's all there was to it, and they could have rescinded the act in an afternoon, and we'd be out. And now we'd be negotiating globally for trade. Globally, with everybody, not just the European Union, North America, the Far East, and everybody else. That's what we should do. We put the cut on. What on earth are we negotiating now? Then we leave. Then we negotiate. And we've got the horses pushing the cart at the moment, which is why it's going wrong. So the whole thing is a shambles. But I said it, and I've said it time and time again, year after year. This has been deliberately sabotaged. This hasn't got to do with incompetent negotiating. This has got nothing to do with, trading this off and trading that. Theresa May was absolutely determined to sabotage it, and as soon as she chose Oily Robbins at number 10 Downing Street, and that's the people who've been running it, we knew that we weren't going to get a deal. It's absolutely disgraceful. I don't know where it's going to go from here, because she's going to lose the vote in the House. She will lose the vote in the House. But if you have a House of Commons determined not to leave, which it is, with the exception of about 100 members, they're determined not to leave. It's like being on a train. It's that every passenger's bought a ticket to Scarborough, but the driver wants to go to Manchester. But you're going to go to Manchester, aren't you? Because he's the guy at the front steering the damn thing. And that's what we've got. And you would have thought, when she campaigned for Remain, Theresa May campaigned for Remain, it might have gone, maybe she's not, quite the right person to carry out the task of Brexit, but who knows?
She used to work for the Bank of England.
Deliberately.
Theresa May used to work for the Bank of England.
2 years.
Yeah.
Lot of them did. About 7 members of
Amanda
cabinet
Rowan.
are all bankers.
They're all bankers. They should call it.
They're all what?
They're all bankers.
You gave a brilliant talk about the scam of British banking. And I got the little clip, and I thought that was amazing. And I circulated that a lot. And I'd love it if you could talk more about that, because why are sitting in the cabinet in this cartel of corrupt bankers who are stealing from everybody through fake accounts, which the Treasury doesn't want to address?
The problem is the Bank of England is less the problem than Goldman Sachs. You'll find if you dig down that a lot of these senior people are Goldman Sachs or influenced about Goldman Sachs, or they go to Goldman Sachs on retirement. And now I worked for the Warburg Empire when I was in investment banking, which I was for quite a while. But what is interesting is, let's take George Osborne. Just take George Osborne as an example. What did he do as Chancellor of the Exchequer to have got him £500,000 a year job with Merrill Lynch? Because Merrill Lynch is now the bank it was, they called it, £500,000 a year for 1 day a week. So what did he do when he was Chancellor for 7 years? What nudge and wink did he give them? And I'll show you how you can do this. Just give an idea how you do this. Let's say, the Chancellor has a glass of water, or I think one of them had a gin. I think he had a few gins too before he came on, but never mind. So I've got a glass of water there. Now let's talk about the financial transaction tax. Now there's going to be a financial transaction tax in Europe or in the United Kingdom. You're talking billions. Even if it's only 0.03% financial transaction tax. Because we are the centre of one of the world centres of investment and finance, that is actually billions and billions of pounds. Now, let's say he's going to announce, or maybe not announce, his plans for a financial transaction tax. Now, that gives two things. You can buy call options, or you can buy put options. And the call option, of course, is you anticipate the market going up. You buy a put option, you anticipate the market going down. So let's say that he's given the nod to Merrill Lynch, BlackRock as it now is. Somebody else bought Merrill Lynch. Anyway, BlackRock, it doesn't matter. Or maybe other banks as well, doesn't matter if it's Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. This is an international game running into billions. He could say, if I take a sip of water before I start speaking, it means there's going to be a financial transaction tax. That gives, before he sits down, 40 minutes for them to buy options. So if it's going on, they buy put options, or they buy call options. So he comes on and he just does that. No emails, no nothing, he sips his water, and the city knows, and they start to buy options as fast as they can. And that means billions and billions. We're talking billions of dollars. And here we know that Mrs. May's husband, Philip, who runs an equity, doesn't run it actually, he's lacking, but it's a good source of information, one might presume. So Theresa May knows that the CIA and the Pentagon have decided to up the ante in Syria with some extra airstrikes, maybe some airstrikes on Russian emplacements or Syrian emplacements, whatever it may be. Now, he knows that. She goes back to gin and tonic tomorrow, or you're looking a bit around, what's going to happen tomorrow? So they're going to escalate the fighting in Syria. And he goes, oh, they? Oh, well, have another gin, darling. I'll make a call. And off it goes. It's gin time. time I sit in Wall Street, midday, very tasty, thank you very much. Lockheed, Raytheon, British Aerospace, buy heavily. Buy heavily call options, there's going to be a punch-up. And when the punch-ups happen, you all know 48 hours later, the shares have gone up 15 or 16%. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, all the people that manufacture the missiles, the guns, and all that kind of thing. And one phone call. Why would anybody else employ Philip May? I mean, have a look at it. He wouldn't get into my company, but he won't clean the cars. But that one phone call, he's there for the phone call. He has the Prime Minister's ear. And does she keep secrets from Philip? I don't know. I wouldn't have thought so. And they all get pretty rich, don't they? Tony Blair's pretty rich, isn't he?
He's got his own bank.
Yeah, everybody's doing very nicely. The only man who's left politics skint was me. Don't think I'm not bitter and twisted about it. Yes, I am. I have my price. There's a TV thing. I have my price. Give me a quango.
Any more questions? Yes.
Yes, just a quick one. I was pleased to hear you mention immigrants and not migrants, as they seem to be on BBC and all the media. But where do you see the threat from immigrants, politically and military, for us and for Europe?
Well, I don't see how we can go as when I was in London last week. I don't go to London much these days, but I do like to talk to cabbies, and I talk to people, and I've got friends down there, and I do a little bit of business down there. There are now, of course, great swathes of London, which are no-go areas. The cabs won't go, the police won't go, so on and so forth, and everybody knows where they are. The cabs know exactly where they are because they have to know, in order so they don't get mobbed or all the rest of it. So we can't really go on as we are, but the only way I can see a way out of this, and I've really thought about it, is that sooner or later there's going to have to be a really serious mass repatriation program. I really can't see any other way. And the sad thing is, the good people, the welcome people, like friends from the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who are integrationists, who are good citizens, the baby's going out with the bathwater if we're not careful. And that's a great shame. But there are too many bad people who seem to think they can do as they want. Well, they can do as they want. They don't really get punished. We've all seen these problems, and sooner or later there has to be, I think, I can't see another way other than a mass repatriation policy. It's going to get ugly. It's going to get a lot uglier than it is. It will start in France.
Not a threat to all buggers like me and you, but it is to a family.
It is. I think it will start. It's already, I think, happening in France. They've got a leader there. They've got Marine Le Pen, who is a charismatic leader to deal with it. We don't have. And it's happening, of course, in Italy as well. So yes, there will be a pushback on this, quite a big pushback. But it doesn't matter. You can say no more. You can tow immigrant boats back to North Africa. You can do all that kind of thing. But what are you going to do with the millions that are already here?
Coming over on rubber ducks and lilacs in France. Yeah.
I don't know what we're going to do about it. I mean, it's all very well because most politicians and senior police officers live in leafy suburbia. It doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect me. I live in a tiny village stuck in East Yorkshire. It doesn't affect me. I've got a small holding. I'm a happy little bunny. My family's a happy little bunny. It doesn't affect me. But if you're ordinary, hard-working, working-class people in the big cities, you're being dumped on. And sooner or later, it's going to go wrong.
If you want to destroy a nation's character, bring a load of immigrants in.
Yeah.
Mm. And the outbreeders, maybe we better make a start. You know.
But they all tend to vote Labour as well.
If I can just say, I think we might eat for ourselves or eat for our children and for our grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's why I'm doing what bit I can do.
Of course.
And I think we're all the same.
I know.
What's your take on the Marrakesh agreement?
I'm sorry, but it's there.
The
The Marrakesh Declaration.
Oh, well, I'm not quite sure. You see, most of what goes on has got nothing to do with what, if you see it, if you can see it or hear it, it means it's already happened.
Yeah.
Everything's already happened.
Well, this was rubber stamped back in May, wasn't it?
Yeah, so, but it's a bit like we used to have a little bit of a laugh when I was in the city. The way to get ahead in the equity market was to get to the Evening Standard before your client. Nobody actually knows anything, you just have to find out about a nanosecond before everybody else does. But this has been going on, and every bit it's gone on with. So the biggest threat that we've got, of course, and there's another speaker, so I won't cover it, coming on later, and that's quantitative easing. If you're degrading money by printing it, and they printed £350 billion, if you turn the handle, you degrade money. And they say, oh, well, you say, where's the inflation? Well, the inflation's gone into assets, which is why none of our grandchildren can afford a house, because it's gone into assets. It's gone into bonds. It's gone, therefore, naturally to people who already have it. And it's called in economics the Cantillon effect. If you're first in the queue, you get your hand in the till. If you're an ordinary Joe, you're behind the 8 ball. And so we're going to see a massive collapse in banking and fiat currencies, and that's going to happen soon. We're only a year or 2 years away from that.
If that,
Yeah.
Can I just say, we do have the lawful right to stop all this. We've got Article 61 in the Magna Carta. All we have to do is go into lawful rebellion, cut off the money supplied to the government, and they're finished.
We've got somebody on next about common law, but can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
The financial transaction tax, I used to be part of a consumer working information group with actuaries, and I quizzed them recently. I said, did you know anything about the financial transaction tax? And they were not told that their funds under account were going to be covered under the financial transaction tax. And just for the benefit of everybody here and people listening at home, the financial transaction tax is another tax on the money being monitored by your pension funds and will be removed. Another tax. So your pensions are not safe. That's what we're saying.
You pilfer, and of course Gordon Brown pilfered. He took away the tax relief on dividends in pensions in 1997, and I did teach, well before politics, I was managing pension funds in the city, and I went on, do you know I had to explain to Sue McGregor on the BBC how pension schemes work. It wasn't a question, she didn't know. Nobody at the BBC knew. And I also spoke to the Financial Times city editor of the Saturday Financial Times, and he didn't know how pension schemes work. No. So Gordon Brown knew that. You can put your hand in the till, can't you? You see, the thing is, I often use this analogy with undergraduates. You come into my drawing room, it's full of knickknacks. Some of it's tat, all of it's tat. So you can have a plastic gondola from Venice, which is mega tat. Or you might find a silver snuff box, a Georgian silver snuff box, because that's been given to me and it's only yay big. So we've no idea. We've no idea what's in our drawing room. So any guest could nick anything at all. It would be years. Did you ever see that silver snuff box? I don't know. Where is it? I don't know. I haven't seen it, but you don't see it. You see how easy it is to take things away. And your next speaker, I'm sure, will cover on common law how they take that away. If you don't teach the principles of English law at school, it's very easy to take it away from kids who don't know what they're entitled to, isn't it?
You don't know.
No?
Well, yes.
I would like to know how many politicians do you think are aware that we now have a situation where judges in UK courts are creating false claims, never particularised, never issued, never served, never sealed by the court, and then putting orders against them, which steal your house, or steal your money, or do something to harm you. What lawlessness has brought this about?
Well,
I move to your everything's called
Yeah, but this is really in your face. This is happening in the High Court. It's happened twice in 1 month.
Courts.
They're not courts, but I want to hear.
You dumb down, what you do is you systematically over generations dumb down your educational system. You dumb it down. I know now lawyers who have very little idea about, if it isn't about conveyancing or it isn't about where they can make a fee, they don't really have any concept of the law. Now, I would have thought, because we have the stewardship of the law, children should be told what their constitutional protection is under the system of common law. And you mentioned, a young lady over there mentions Magna Carta. I must have stolen the thunder from the next speaker, but common law goes back to King Alfred the Great. It goes on, well before Magna Carta. But most kids don't even know that. They look blankly at you. Even public school kids, I speak of public schools as well, they're not much better because they've got to tick boxes. And you get to university and you have to tick boxes to get your job. Did you get a 2-1 in political science at Newcastle? Yes. And you got a bad liver, I expect, on the way there. Yes, I did actually. Played on the rugby contest, you know, that's right, into the next job. It's not education. They're not educated. Take one more final question, so I know. No, tap it.
Going back to your comments about the officers in the army being quite horrified at the potential for their allegiance being directed towards Tusk, Juncker and the EU. As ex-forces guys and our appreciation of what squaddies and officers think of their duty as, what do you think will be the result from this between what I expect? I'm sitting here and you talking parents have written, I saw Julian Thompson's online comments the other day. So when this gets disseminated throughout the armed forces, what do you think their reaction will be when their Queen and country in there?
I think it might still rerun a threat of mass resignations that we saw in Ulster just before the Great War. I certainly would resign my commission. If I were still a serving officer, I would certainly resign mine if I felt my allegiance was no longer to my Queen and country, but it was to unelected politicians in Russell. I was shot.
Well, they're coming down on Parliament with people in the forces who are even taking photos with the likes of Tommy Robinson.
Yes, I did a podcast on that. It's got 250,000 views, I think. Yeah, there's nothing in the King's regulations that says you can't be photographed with whosoever you like. But I mean, the trouble is now they think army officers are coming from a different background, not in the better readings, with a family and military tradition. We've got people who, I mean, virtually all army officers now have a university degree. What the hell does that want to do with soldiers? Beyond me. And they go almost straight in as captains. You know, they keep the nose clean for a year and they go in as captains. They've had no commanding experience at all, of course you learn your trade as a commander. Platoon or a troop, that's where you learn your, that's what it's all about. No, it's a shame.
I wonder what the Russians think of that.
The Russians are not controlled by the Rothschilds.
But the thing is, it's an interesting point because I was going to touch upon military unification later on in the afternoon, but I thought I'd test serving military reaction when I handed them a military unification leaflet, which you'll find at the door on your way out, and I'd like you all to distribute them, especially you could stand outside barracks and do it, because I was handing them and they said, you're mad, you're mad. They are not, there is a total shutdown. Nobody is being told anything.
My experience, I spent 5 years on the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, and so I've seen a lot quite recently of the Navy and the Air Force and working with them. It's quite a good scheme. It's finished now because it was working too well, of course, so we got rid of it. But I spent time in Afghanistan and at sea with the Navy and all sorts of stuff. I really got up to speed, got up to date, and I can tell you there is now nobody more naive than the British officer in these matters. If you want the weakest group of the lot, it's the sergeant's mess or the CPO's mess. They know exactly what's going on. The sergeants know what's going on. The officers don't have a clue. And of course, the Toms don't care. Tommy Atkins has never cared. A regular soldier, so obviously, if somebody fills his belly and gives him his green shilling a day, he really doesn't give a shit.
But the malnutrition's taking part in the army now. The malnutrition, something like 10% of the army squaddies are suffering from malnutrition.
I hadn't seen that, but I know when if you went to a Royal Air Force base, you died like a king. The army was all right, but the Royal Air Force, was absolutely superb. But of course then they contracted out. They got rid of the Army Catering Corps, they got rid of the catering staff, so now it's all brought in, portion control, so and the Scottish do silly things. They will say, oh no, I don't have to pay that, I won't pay that, even a modest amount. A Scotty and his money are soon parted. You're not a Scotty with common sense, you're there to shoot the bad guys. Unless you're in Reading. They're all very clever, doesn't matter what rank they are.
Well, thank you so much, Godfrey, for coming.